Hello and welcome to this extra seminar on race and the media at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. I'm Meera Selva. I run the Journalist Fellowship Programme at the Institute, and I also chair the Global Journalism Seminar series that normally happens on a Wednesday lunchtime. I added this extra seminar in at the end of our last term because there was suddenly a huge debate in Britain about racism in the industry, and on a very personal level, as well as a professional level, I felt that this was a conversation I really wanted to have right now. We've been speaking about diversity in newsroom for the last 2 years at these seminar series. We had Dorothy Byrne, then head of news at Channel 4, speaking in no uncertain terms about how if you do not have a properly representative newsroom, you will literally get the news wrong. And we've had Shirish Kulkarni and Nisina Khabu from The Voice talking about building careers in journalism in newsrooms that fundamentally don't get and often don't care about who you are. And today I'm really pleased to be having this conversation with Shazia Majid of Norway's VG newspaper. Shazia is becoming something of a superstar in Norwegian journalism. She was part of a team of investigative journalists who won Norway's most prestigious prize last year for an investigation on how elderly patients are being discharged from hospitals in the dead of night. And she's now an op-ed writer for the same paper, and we'll talk about what this signifies. And in between switching from news to opinion, she was with us in Oxford as a Reuters Institute Journalism Fellow, courtesy of the Fritord programme. She also wrote a book weaving in her family history with the story of non-Western immigrant women who migrated to Norway during the early 70s. And it's a book that blends narrative, but also shows the gaps in missing data and how for much of Norway's history, these women weren't seen and simply weren't even counted in official statistics. In the backdrop of the Black Lives Matter movement in the US, we've had several conversations about race, the media, and objectivity, but each country and each community needs to have its own discussions about diversity, as the debate in the United States is not the same as everywhere else. Now, I'm aware this is not a particularly diverse conversation right now. We're both European women of South Asian origin who built our careers in Western newsrooms. But I did want to have this conversation nonetheless in the light of recent debates in Britain. The Duke of Duchess of Sussex, Harry and Meghan, added to the sound here with their interview with Oprah Winfrey. Prince Harry spoke about how it had hurt him that his family never spoke about the colonial undertones of news headlines and articles, and he called the tabloid newspapers racist and bigoted in their coverage. And in response to Society of Editors, the organisation that organises the biggest media industry awards in the UK, put out a rather bad-tempered statement saying that the UK media is not bigoted and will not be swayed from its vital role holding the rich and powerful to account. Several newspaper editors distanced themselves from the remark, and several individuals and organisations pulled out of the award ceremony in protest. The chair of the society, Ian Murray himself, stepped down, and the society is still debating what to do next. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation, because there are a lot of people having opinions about what race in the media industry is about and how it's defined and who should call it out if it exists at all. And I think it's worth kind of making sure we have a multiplicity of voices in this. Shazia, if I kind of turn to you first on the royal question in particular, because I know you've been watching this play out from a distance, and I know you've written about it for VG. Could you tell us a little bit of what your take is on this furore?
I don't know, I'm not surprised. I'm just surprised at the extent of it, at how the debate kind of exploded in the realms of the interview. And I think it was about time. It kind of, for me, it was a sort of relief that it's out there in the open, and you guys are having a discussion about it. Because I did write a couple of opinions when the interview came. And it sort of also started a debate here in Norway about a general racism debate, a cultural war debate. But I did feel that it's hard to talk about, because I wrote about how ethnic minority journalists went against the editors and said that there is bigotry and there is racism. And I was challenged on that. Like, how do you know? There were like, how many were there? 100 and something. That's not a lot, and stuff like that. But I think it is so important to kind of use that. You guys, I hope are using this and keeping the momentum going on, because it is a debate we should have. And in Norway, I mean, I work in a tabloid, and it's nothing like a tabloid in the UK, but even then we've kind of been shocked by some of the coverage of Meghan Markle and other celebrities, and how far you kind of push that in the British media. And I've always wondered how it must be to be of ethnic minority and work in that media. So I think it's fascinating, and I hope that this discussion can kind of grow out of UK and even be here in Norway as well. And I'm hopefully I will be able to do that at some point, because we do have these issues here as well.
I mean, a lot of it, is about sitting sometimes and cringing and kind of trying not to show too much emotion, as people who are colleagues and often friends just kind of handle this very, very clumsily. And just to give an example, I was in a big American newsroom when MIA performed at the Super Bowl with Madonna and raised her finger at the end of her performance, and it created a massive outcry and a massive fine. And she's Tamil, so Sri Lankan Tamil, so she's from the same community as me, and her full name is Meera Selva. And just sitting there listening to people butchering her name, kind of thinking, who is this woman? What's she on about? With no real awareness that she's kind of quite a big deal, and she's kind of a political activist as well as a singer, and very well known in certain communities, and a lot of the audience watching her would have known exactly who she is. But it's a newsroom that's writing about these people as if they're complete strangers, even if they're appearing on the Super Bowl, therefore are by definition fairly well known already. And I think it's this issue of not, when do you say this is really a ridiculous tone to be adopting? And at the journalism fellowship program that I run, we've been having lots of conversations about objectivity and news, and what does objectivity mean? And this has been an issue related to diversity, because what is objectivity? The situation we've ended up in is one where everyone can have an opinion on racism, but in many ways, the ones who've experienced it directly are considered to have the least expertise on the subject because they're invested in this. Is that something you've encountered or think of?
Most definitely. I mean, it depends. The hardest topic to write about as ethnic minority is racism, and that's strange because I mean, in VG or in Norway, my background and my expertise when it comes to topics like in Norway, sort of forced marriages is a huge topic. Hijab is a huge topic, and crime obviously is a topic, and you can talk about it, and they do consider your expertise valuable in the newsroom. But when it comes to discrimination and racism, they'd rather you didn't. And I find it hard, because when I was an investigative journalist, I was that for 6 years. I did want to do stories in that field, but I found it hard to kind of make my case, because they'll always assume that you're invested far too much in this, right? But as an opinion writer, I feel I stand on my own. Like, I have my own opinion, and I can say whatever I want. And I have been brave enough to do that. Like, when I wrote this opinion about, the heading was, what if Meghan Markle was white? And I knew what kind of hate I was going to get, but I still wrote it. And I think a better part of it is due to my skin color. That at one, like I can say what I want to say, but I know the hate I'm going to get. And the other opinion I did write about Markle and the whole scandals interview was that I said that whatever we're seeing in the royal family is like watching an Indian soap opera. Like, yes. This is patriarchy 101, and the family system, and everything is recognizable for us who come from that community. And people were fascinated. It was widely read. So, I mean, we have a lot to bring to table in a newsroom, but do not speak about the racism you meet and this in the newsroom, or like when you're a writer, but also the racism you've experienced as a person through your life.
I get the former point, don't talk about the racism in the newsroom, is part of kind of wider criticism of the media industry, that it doesn't, it doesn't deal with, it doesn't put its own house in order. And this is to do with sometimes, being bad managers, being discriminatory towards women, not having family-friendly policies, not understanding issues of discrimination that its staff face. The second point, I'd be interested, why do you feel you can't speak about the racism you face elsewhere in your newsroom?
I feel like, you're not looked upon as credible because you have a stake in it. Like, I feel that as a reporter, you kind of, the people should, like, it's important for journalists to be believed in what they're doing, like that they're objective and that they're trustworthy and that they're fair and are not colored by their own experiences and where they stand in an issue, and that, that's something which we cannot do. Like, all of us, none of us are objective. You cannot be in whatever issue. What you can be fair and transparent, right? So, but the thing is that because I have the skin color I have, I can't hide like that I have a stake in this, but I think it's harder for journalists to be brave if they're alone.
This idea of kind of being objective and somehow outside the news, or bringing your identity to the news, I think we've seen play out certainly in lots of the American newsrooms, almost as an intergenerational conflict, where the younger generation feel that their values and their principles and their identity should be allowed into the newsroom and into their workplace, and they have a right to express it, and they have a right to work in a place where their values align with that of the organization. And then there's an older generation that believe there is a kind of objectivity and a truth. And is this something that you think is conscious? Do you think this is something is changing as you have this kind of younger generation coming in that are more used to carrying different types of identity to do with race, sexuality, education levels, all sorts of different parts of their identity that they bring with them?
Is that something you are, because we've had ethnic minorities in Norway for 50 years, so it's not been that long, and we do have a really, there is an issue to have ethnic minority journalists in the press, in the media. We are not many, and for the longest time we have been just a few, just a handful in the Norwegian press. They're getting, I won't say it's really like picking up now, but we're more, and they're younger, and they are, like you were saying, they are a bit, they are more confident in who they are, and they kind of challenge the newsroom. They challenge this notion of not being able to kind of use their background and say what they want. I haven't been in the media for that long. It's like 10 years, but still, I do see development, a positive one. But still, we have a long way to go here in Norway, I feel, and most of it is about being so few, and that makes us all vulnerable in our newsroom. So you kind of try to lay low for a while, or until, like you, I've been in VG for 10 years. I feel I have more room to express myself now.
But now, you talked earlier before we started the seminar being one of the only one, journalists of color, certainly at this level of seniority, such a high profile. And does this add a level of loneliness or kind of extra pressure on you? And also, do you feel like you're asked to represent the entire community?
Yeah. I know I'm extremely privileged to be in this position, and all of us who are in a position of power, because this is a position of power. When you are opinion writer in Norway's largest newspaper, you are in a position of power, and I kind of acknowledge that. But still, I do feel that my position makes me extremely vulnerable, because I am the only person of color in Norway who is an opinion writer, like in all of Norway, and I'm a woman, and I'm a Muslim, and that I mean, the amount of trust and hope that is placed in me by the community it's both extremely, I'm very grateful for that, but it is also a weight too large to bear, because you will falter, you will make mistakes, you will have opinion that the community won't agree with, and I think it's a hard position to be in.
This is the kind of second time you've gone into comment writing, and you mentioned earlier some of the, you wrote these pieces knowing the amount of attacks you face, and this again, as well as the pressure of being the only one and being the representative of the community, there's a lot of data about how women, and certainly women of color, are under far more threat in when they write. Could you speak a little bit about whether you found news in a way easier to operate in, because you're working on the story and you have to put yourself out there less, or do you think it makes no difference?
I didn't get your question, Meera, once again.
Sorry, it's a convoluted question. Did you find that when you were working as an investigative journalist and as a news reporter, did you find that you were less under fire because you
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I do feel like in hindsight that was a conscious decision, because I was tired of all the pressure of being one of the few.
So you'd been an opinion writer and then you just had enough.
Yeah. I remember that this was in 2016. Trump was elected. I wrote an opinion piece which kind of unleashed a tsunami of threats. And I'm proud of that piece now, because it did stand the test of time. But after that, I was like, I can't do it anymore. I need a break. I was afraid for my life. I was afraid for my kid. I have 2 young boys. I was a single mother, and that kind of, I just needed to lay low for a while to kind of gather my energy. And it's sad that it has to be like this. So I decided, and I was fortunate enough to kind of become an investigative reporter, and then I've been that for 6 years. And also, when I was an investigative reporter, and this is one other thing that I'm very passionate about, that I had to kind of prove my mettle, like over and over again. So when I won my first journalism award in 2017, and then again in 2018, and then again now in 2020, that's kind of when I kind of lowered my shoulders, and I was confident that my work spoke for itself. And now I'm in a different position. I feel that I don't have to prove anymore that I'm not VG's mascot. Like, if you know what does it mean? Yep. Like that black person.
Yep.
So she's there because she's been she's there because she's not good enough, but she's a woman of color, and that's why she's there. So I had to fight that for the longest time. So yeah, so that was a good period, actually, those 6 years.
It's terrific, but again, there are plenty of opinion writers who don't have to win several awards in order to be allowed the right to have their opinion in a public platform. I'm going to go to the questions as well, and if you do have questions or even comments for this seminar, do type them in the Q&A box, and I'll bring them in as we speak. But I just want to also talk a little bit about the COVID-19 vaccination program, because this is something where both countries have something in common, which is that the uptake of vaccinations amongst the minority communities in England and in Norway are very low, much lower than the general population. And part of this, I think, is to do with a lack of communication and a lack of trust in these communities with both the media and with the establishment. Can you tell me a little bit about what what you think some of the reasons might be on this?
In Norway, we've had a huge debate about the communication of government towards immigrant communities, because, I mean, Norwegian is a hard language to learn. Most of them, my parents aren't fluent in Norwegian. They've been here for 50 years. A lot of people do not understand what the government is telling them to do, not to do. And I feel strongly that the diversity in newsroom is so important, and it has never been as important as it is right now during the pandemic. It shows the value of diversity in the newsroom. I actually did a video in Urdu to kind of reach out to the Pakistani community in Norway. In Norway, the biggest problem right now is that we are having a huge outbreak in Oslo. Most of the infections are in the city, like in London. Like it's sort of a metropolitan, just a smaller size, but a metropolitan city. And communication has been a huge problem. And we haven't rolled out the vaccine as much yet as UK has. But I'm a bit worried about how this will play out when our community is to be vaccinated, because most of them are not that old, because it's only like those 85 plus, 80 plus who are getting it. So I've been following what's happening in UK, because everything which happened in UK has been happening in Norway later on in a smaller scale. But tell me, Meera, how do you feel the communication has been in UK? How important are the, I mean, ethnic minority reporters? Do they feel like they have a role in the pandemic, which is like broader than like just reporting, or do they reach their communities?
I think more than ethnic minority communities here, it's local reporters, because the kind of minority communities where this has been a bit of an issue are often quite clustered around certain cities. So I think a lot of the local reporters and the local journalists feel a kind of very strong sense of responsibility to both speak and advocate on part of these communities. The vaccination program has rolled out kind of much faster in the UK, and there is a kind of consensus overall in most of the media that kind of support it and to be quite positive, and we don't get the same levels of vaccine skepticism that we see in many of the other big European countries. That's quite clear. In terms of the vaccine uptake, I think that there's similar problem amongst minority communities. I think the problems are similar to that of Norway. Part of it is language. Part of it is also crucially whether the information that's targeted at them is reaching them and what they're seeing instead. So I think that's where you start getting a lot of misinformation in the form of leaflets, WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, giving completely different information. This was true also during the lockdown rules. There was a lot of minority communities. There were rules saying you can have certain kinds of weddings, you can have certain kind of gatherings, as long as you wear masks at the door and then take them off when you're inside. Things like that. Things that are absolutely wrong. And when the police turned up, the people inside were law-abiding, good citizens who genuinely didn't realize they were breaking the law by following this information. So I think that's the problem. There's kind of a world of information in these communities that's, again, that we don't see unless you're part of this community. And it is absolutely the area where you do need reporters who both understand the community, possibly live there and speak all the local languages as well.
Do you think the pandemic will change how the media sees at the need of diversity? Do you think this will help?
I think Britain is a special case because it's so centralized. The media is so centralized in London, and we've seen recently the BBC saying it's going to move part of its team to Glasgow, and a kind of general outpouring of dismay at this. But I think I would like to think that one thing that would happen is that the idea that the media industry has to be centralized in London with the London perspective, and everything will change. If we can work from home, we can work from anywhere, and you should be able to build careers in journalism outside the UK. On the issue of diversity, I think it's a long haul. I think we're a long way to go. I think the Society of Editors debate shows this. The numbers are still very low. There's still kind of relatively few journalists of minority communities, especially in leadership, especially in the kind of senior leadership roles and the decision-making roles. And this struck me quite forcefully. It had not occurred to me. I've been a journalist for over 20 years. Before I joined the Reuters Institute, it was kind of, several jobs in journalism. And I've not once been interviewed by someone who's not white for any of these roles. And this includes foreign postings in Asia and in Africa. So even for postings abroad, all the people who interviewed me are white. So I think I know there are, we now have Rula Khalaf at the Financial Times, but you can count on one hand the number of kind of people at that level. So I think there is still a long way to go on this.
We don't have anyone.
Yeah.
Not one editor, not one in a senior position. All of us are like reporters or now one opinion writer, but the glass ceiling is really hard to break here in Norway. And it's not about if you're competent enough or not. It's about the media houses kind of building up these like people so that they can reach that level. Like media companies have to invest in people. Like in Norway, in VG, they have had a strategy of investing in women to lift women up to senior level positions. They have to do the same thing with diversity, but it's not happening. It's not on the agenda. I mean, the diversity situation in Norway, like in press, is really, there's a lot to be done there.
I think speaking to the journalists here, that there are quite a lot of entry-level programs that work relatively well. They bring journalists in at the kind of at the trainee level and that focus on making sure that intake is as diverse as popular. But then there's a lot of journalists who enter through that and then find themselves in a large newsroom and then find they have very little space to go. There they hit all sorts of barriers, both actual barriers and some in their head, some imposed on them by others, and end up feeling either that they've got nowhere to rise within this media organization and so have to leave journalism altogether, or that the only way they're going to really succeed is to go and join something smaller, something possibly less prestigious and less wealthy, but somewhere where they can have their authentic voice and their career.
Yeah, and I mean, and what I truly believe in is that it's not that people are not good enough.
No.
You're just not building them up to that level when you kind of hire them. It's an investment you're not doing.
And also this issue of like what you speak on, because you're, as you said, you're both seen as someone representing diversity in the newsroom, but also people aren't very happy when you speak about racism that you encounter personally. And again, going back to the Society of Editors, because I thought it was very stark. We are having a conversation about diversity in journalism, but often that's the only place journalists of ethnic minorities are allowed to have their opinion. So the Society of Editors organized an online conference last November, and I had a quick look at the lineup, and it was about 43 journalists. The only journalists of color were speaking on panels about diversity and inclusion, except for one who was allowed to speak on mental health in the newsroom, and one other who wasn't a journalist, a cabinet office press officer, who was on a panel about devolution. But basically all the journalists of color were put to get on the panels on diversity, even though they report on politics, economics, society, but this is the place they're allowed to have their opinions. But
do you feel, Meera, in lieu of the debate that started in the UK now, do you feel it's easy for reporters like you have been one, and those who are working now, to kind of go back into the newsroom and say that I am getting all this hate and these threats, and it's affecting me. Like this is hate, like this is racial undertones, this is racism. Can they kind of, because I feel, and this is a personal sort of how I perceive things, this might not be correct, but that's how I think it's not appreciated by your peers that you talk openly about the racism you have to face as a opinion writer or a reporter, because I have met this, that yeah, every one of us is getting those comments in the comments section, like, what are you whining about?
Yeah, I think the comments I got was always the implication I've got this job because I'm an Asian woman rather than because of my ability. Now, I've got lots of jobs because of whatever reasons. I don't think it can only be about tokenism, but that's something you've just got to constantly prove yourself through the stories and through the reporting, and then brush off, because you can't actually call somebody out on that, because that would be seen as hostile. It's said in the pub, it's said with banter, it's said through kind of insinuation. So you, at that moment, you've just got to laugh and move on and brush it off, and occasionally get, throw some barb back and get a reputation for being really bitchy or oversensitive. And it's just something you live with, and that just becomes something you become.
Yeah, it's sort of emotional labor all of us have to do in addition to doing our work, right? So, yeah. And it's also very sad that I kind of joke about it before anyone else gets to joke about it.
Okay.
To kind of, yeah.
I never do that.
If I go into a new sort of a group or I'm not that much at the moment, but whenever I meet a group of people, I tend to do that, which is sort of sad when I think about it. But I'm so sick and tired of that tokenism, that no one says that to your face, sort of like in a serious setting.
Yeah.
But you kind of have that vibe all the time. So yeah, I can joke about it because I won an award. So no one has to kind of doubt my abilities, right? But it shouldn't be that way.
I worked for a big German news organization where I was pretty much the only non-white person in a kind of sea of about 600 editorial staff, except for one other journalist, a very good journalist who was part Turkish. And there was one year where she won an award and went up to receive her award, and they put a photo of me up instead, because the staff compiling the photo montages saw a non-German name, saw a non-German looking woman, and just assumed they're the two people. So which is, I didn't quite know what to make of it. And again, it was just one of these things where everyone just had to smile and say, "Oh God," and roll your eyes slightly without saying, "There's something deeply wrong about this." If you don't know who, she was one of their star reporters, and they didn't know who she was. They didn't know what she was like.
Exactly. Yeah, there are so many such stories.
Yeah, I'm going to turn to the questions, because there's quite a few journalists from Norway, and I think it's really worth asking these questions. One from Kaman Mack was saying, "I'm a first-generation immigrant living in Norway for the past decade. Hard for me to break into working in a Norwegian newsroom, so I established my own journalism startup in Oslo. But even as an entrepreneur with a minority background, it's also hard because minorities don't always get the funding they need." And so, do you have any advice, and do you have any thoughts about how kind of journalism startups can work in this space and build that space up for journalists from a minority background?
Oh, that's a hard one. I mean, Norway do have a lot of different kind of support systems and fundings and stuff like that. I have to tell you, me and my sister started the first youth magazine back in the days for people, for ethnic minority, and also we started a website in 2007. That was like how I got into journalism as a grown-up person. I think working with other people who are established can be a way in. And I know you're doing a conference in some next week. I'm going to join you and listen into what you guys are talking about. And I think it's so important that we help each other, help lift each other, and give each other space and room. And that's what we can do. Like now we're having this conversation, which is an important conversation. Everyone who is in a position of power should make room for other people and lift them. So I can be there for you in any which way I can, but I think our funding it's hard in media in general at the moment, and especially for a startup. So I don't know what to tell you actually.
We'll see if you can find some resources and send them over. And a question from Tor Christofferson, who's our current Fritord Fellow, talking about the podcast VG did on the COVID outbreaks in Oslo, and the fact that part of the reason of the outbreak is that because many of the kind of immigrants live in quite crowded housing without any opportunity for social distancing. And it hadn't really been reported on before VG reported on it via its podcast. And he's just asking, why do you think that might be? And do you think in some ways the media much of the media don't know how to report on the communities, on ethnic minority communities, because they're worried they'll be accused of racism, or they'll unleash a kind of troll army on either themselves or the community, or that they'll kind of start a conflagration which they didn't intend to.
This is very interesting. What happened is that because I've been an investigative journalist for so long, I couldn't jump in on breaking news like I would want to. I started as an opinion writer on 1st of February, and one of the first stories I did was this story. So this whole news about how immigrant community there is like the hugest outbreaks in Oslo right now is in that community. And what I did is that I kind of made that analysis of how they are living and how they're living in larger families. And that sort of started a whole debate. And then we made news stories, and then we made podcasts. And I got so much feedback from people about like, this is a good example of how important diversity is. Because as soon as I got the chance, I did the story about this fact. And after this, it's been everywhere, and everyone is talking about it. I've been talking to ministers who want me to tell them about this. I'm like, you should know about this. I shouldn't be telling you, right? So it's in a community like Norway, it's really powerful.
It's about this idea that journalists as politicians should represent the communities they're meant to represent. They're meant to come from these communities. They're meant to be part of them. They're not meant to be something other, looking down with a objective, beady gaze on these people. They're meant to be part of the same groups.
Yeah, I agree, but I still do think that if you are in that position, because there have been people who have told me, do not write immigrant stories. Do not do that, because you don't want to be that journalist. But now, after 10 years, I do feel that if my expertise is in some areas, it's my obligation to actually do that work when no one else is doing it, especially during a pandemic, when everyone is like, oh, immigrants don't know how to social distance, they're not following the rules. There was a lot of hate against immigrant communities, and then you write the story and tell them that they're living in small houses. It should be obvious, but people don't know. Like, things we take for granted, people outside the cities do not know. So you have to kind of, that's our duty, I guess.
You draw a picture. The question from Eduardo, saying, Eduardo Suarez, our head of comms, do you think that the balance of power in newsrooms is changing, in the sense that rank and file journalists are using social media, Slack channels to put pressure on editors and CEOs to improve things diversity-wise? It touched on what we were talking about earlier about, is there a generational shift? And what he's asking is, are there new channels and new processes?
I don't know, what do you think? Because my experience is that we're talking about it, those of us who are interested in it, but I don't feel we're reaching people in power, like those who make decisions. And also in Norway, to be fair, we do not have a lot of youngsters who are choosing to become reporters. There is not a pool of people to pick from. Like, just recently, a new newspaper started in Oslo, which is the most diverse city in Norway. And they struggled for the longest time to get reporters with ethnic minority backgrounds who were competent enough in whatever field they wanted people in. So that is also an issue. That's part of the picture.
Why do you think young people are not going into journalism? Is it the career prospects? Is it a sense there's more fun to be had elsewhere?
Yeah, because we are just the second generation of immigrants. We're not that far ahead as you guys are in UK. So they call it, I mean, it's a name for it, but the amount of Indian doctors in Norway, it's ridiculous. And every Pakistani parent wants you to be a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer. So reporter is not something you choose.
Yep, that sounds familiar. That's the battle we had as well. Thank you. I want to talk to you a little bit about your book, because it's just kind of fascinating story of both what you looked at, but also crucially what struck me when you kind of gave a seminar on it at the Reuters Institute was the data that was missing on migrant women. They just weren't counted. There were men and there were unmen, essentially, non-men.
Yeah. Yes.
Could you just talk us through this a little bit, what your process of discovery was here?
Yeah, you know, we keep coming back to like how important it is that we are represented in every field. You know, it had to take a daughter of an immigrant to do the work. The story is that I wanted to write a book, the very first book about the history of ethnic minority immigrant women in Norway. And I just thought, because I'm an investigative reporter, this is going to be a walk in the park. I'm just going to find every book there is and study and statistics and just write this book. And I took 3 months off unpaid from work to write the book. And it took me 2 years to do the work, because I did find out that no one had made the statistics that I wanted, as basic as how many women from Pakistan and India and Turkey and Morocco immigrated into Norway in, say, 1971. Those numbers didn't exist. And that is because, and this is why I'm so passionate about diversity and even like women in newsroom, because the main reason this didn't happen was that the media didn't do its job. No one wrote a story about the women, even though they were here in hundreds and thousands. No story, no article, almost none. I mean, I think I found 5 during a period of 10 years or something. I mean, it's ridiculous. And when the press doesn't do its job, there won't be any politics, there won't be any research. So yeah, I had to use a lot of my expertise, investigative journalism, to kind of find those numbers and write that story.
How did you find the numbers?
Oh, there was a lot of like freedom of information requests. I thought that would kind of cut it, but I didn't. What happened was that I found like old statistical ebooks, like physical books, and I had to go through them. And in one of those from 1971, I even remember the table where I found the numbers. That was that table where you had that column with total and of them men. And I was like, so yeah, so the difference has to be women. So that was kind of a turning point in my project. But yeah, at the end of I started in January 2017. In September 2017, the Statistics Bureau did publish the numbers. And I called them and I asked them why now, like 50 years later. And they told me it is because no one has asked before you asked us. So when someone asks for numbers, we make them. So, I mean, our work as journalists and reporters and nonfiction writers, whatever, it is so important that we use our knowledge from our communities to find the stories.
And what you're essentially saying is you're writing and you're statistifying, if that's the word, your community into existence. You're telling them story, and you're bringing out the data, you're making them part of Norway's political and social and economic history in a way that they weren't before, and you're doing that from the point of view of a journalist, which is, if there's a reason journalism needs to exist, this is it. This is to bring a community being.
Making it is so strange because Norway is one of the most documented countries in the world. Yeah. So we have to, and that's also that's a weight you carry. If you're the only one, or if you're one of the few, the weight you carry to kind of document, to kind of make your time count. You're not just a reporter. You're not just there working as a reporter. You're there because, I have to tell these stories. This is so important. If I do not tell about, say, the extended family system in amongst Pakistanis, or amongst Desi communities, Indian, Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities with extended families living under the same room. In Norway, what I did when I did my analysis some weeks ago, before that, this wasn't an issue at all. But then I told them that we have extended families. So small kids are living with their grandparents. And that's why we have the huge amount of infections and deaths that we are having. So we have knowledge which is important to all of the community.
I mean, you've talked a few times about the toll and the emotional toll and the emotional labor that you can carry. I don't want to ask about personal, but do you feel supported by a newsroom? Do you get a sense if there's any kind of awareness of this extra burden? And in particular, you've spoken about online, the attacks, the harassment you've received while being an opinion writer, certainly first time round, and do you feel you get support and understanding from both colleagues, line managers, people in other media organizations? Because one thing I've written about a lot is both press freedom and mental health amongst journalists. And in both cases, the journalists who are under fire or under attack say the one thing that would really help is solidarity. More than money, more than treatment, just solidarity, empathy, a recognition that, that there is something going on.
I'm sighing heavily right now. This is a hard one because, there has been times that you feel alone. You do feel alone. The harder part is when your colleagues just don't understand. I'm sorry. It's not that bad, I have to say. But I have to, first of all, the positive. I have had two managers. When I was an investigative reporter, they're both men. They hired me. They have been, I don't think I would have lasted in my job for 10 years had it not been for them. I could call them any hour of the day, and they've sent me home and said, no more work for you, take a week off and stuff. So they've been essential for me, kind of hanging in there. What I do find hard is that you're not specifically my colleagues in VG, but the broader community of journalists. I have experienced that they make fun of you when you kind of do air your frustrations and your anxieties, and that you're afraid. It is not appreciated that you talk about that you feel vulnerable, that you're having a hard time. And it's not just about ethnicity, it's about being a woman. I mean, a lot of women journalists get rape threats and a lot of violent threats. And you have seniors who kind of laugh it off. And that's really upsetting. And also you kind of, Norwegian newsroom is still kind of 70% men, 30% women. And it's such a macho culture. And even if a man gets a threat or whatever, they laugh it off. So the bar is set so high that you cannot show that you're vulnerable. And for the longest time, and I'm not proud of that now. I should have told my line managers what I was experiencing, but I just felt there wasn't room for that. There wasn't room to tell that I was stopped in the middle of the street by a stranger, and I was afraid he was gonna hit me, or that some, I don't know, Nazi is kind of stalking you or whatever. But now, I'm sorry you had to see me like that, because it's not that bad, because now that I'm more confident, when I started my new job now as a opinion writer, I had this talk. I was like, to me, my security and my well-being is most important. And I want you to keep that in mind. Like, I won't write about all and everything if that sort of endangers me. And also, this is also important, I can see people struggling. And now I know that I'm in a position of power, and I tell them to talk to me, even though that's not my role. I just want to tell them that you're not alone. So, yeah, this was a long kind of rant. I'm sorry.
No, it's absolutely right. And I think also earlier on, you're one is building your career. So you don't want to admit to these things for either fear that you'll be laughed at or not taken seriously, or simply taken off that beat, told fine, if it's too difficult for you, we'll find someone else to write these stories. When you want to write the stories, you just don't want to receive the abuse that comes with them. I'm going to go back to the questions and to Tejas. Hi, Tejas Herad from India, who again was one of our journalist fellows. I'm incredibly proud of the work that he did looking at caste, the role of caste in Indian newsrooms, and really highlighting how hard it was for the lower caste, the people in India to also rise up in newsrooms for very similar reasons. And he's going back to the idea of, what's safe to write on. He's saying, opinion writers from marginalized communities are often made to carry their identities on their shoulders because their identities stand out. And this leads them to be perceived as not objective enough, unless you write by objective topics like tech and economy. Firstly, do you feel this pressure? But also, do you think there are objective topics and subjective topics?
Yeah. Like, because I have a degree in economics as well, I do write a bit. I do try to write a bit about that. When I am tired, I write about that, because no one cares. No one cares about that. Yeah, I do have other beats, because like, I was an investigative journalist. I mean, I can basically write about anything, and when I need a break, I do. But then again, like, when you do get this position, and when you do get this privilege, why should you not write about what is the burning question at the moment? And most of the times, like in Norway, it's always something to do with immigrants, immigration, the cultural war, identity politics, racism, feminism, women's rights, and all of these topics are topics that kind of trigger people. So the feedback, the criticism is fine, but the hate I get sometimes, it's not all the time, is from all walks of life. It's from immigrant communities, it's from racists, it's from like incels, like, because the worst thing you can write an opinion about is anything to do with feminism or women's rights in Norway. I'm sure it's like that in UK as well.
Yeah, so you're in the crosshairs of lots of targets, basically. If there's intersectionality, you're it, which is not a great position to be in for daily peace. I'm going to go to final question and then I'll let you off the hook from Jenny Kengesniemi, who's again our current fellow from Finland. So, Finland's also very socially and culturally homogenous, and the higher education settings are also very, very white, and there aren't many young non-white journalists in the pipeline, and that's something similar to what you were talking about. And part of it is a second generation immigration thing, it's not a profession you're being encouraged to go into. But do you think there's anything else that the media industry in particular can do to encourage a more diverse intake into journalism schools? Is there any kind of outreach that can be done there?
I think, I don't know about how it is in Finland. What I see in Norway is that, it's a real boost to the press, to the media. This pandemic has been a really boost to the media. VG is making a lot of money at the moment. So, so they're hiring people. I think when children of immigrants see that there is job security, I think you will have more coming in. And also when they see other role models, other people like them, that kind of gives birth to kind of more diversity. I think it's important to lift those you do have, and also kind of to help break the glass ceiling and hire ethnic minorities in senior positions. I think that will help hire people. I think I think that's the most important thing, that you are aware of the value of diversity and you have a policy of how you are going to recruit more diversity into your newsroom, like you had with women.
I think this idea of, again, it having to come from the top, it needs to be, it's no point just saying we would like a more diverse newsroom. You need to prove that you are willing to create a diverse newsroom that works all the way up, because people are ambitious, people want job security, people want to be promoted, and they want to get a sense. I think you're absolutely right that it's important to have that visibility on the top. That's a shameless plug for the fact that we've got a fact sheet coming out on Sunday looking at race and leadership in media markets around the world. It's the second one we've done at the Reuters Institute Follow. We did this last year. We're going to track the leadership, the profile of leaders of the top 10 brands digitally and non-digitally around the world. So do look out for that. And in the meantime, Shazia, this has been an incredible hour. I'm really honored that you took the time to speak to us. I know you're incredibly busy, incredibly in demand, but also this is not really a topic either of us really want to be talking about. We want to kind of be doing the rest of our jobs and just being able to carry our identity as part of, privately.
Yeah, exactly. Not having this discussion, not having to talk about all the sad things we do experience, right? But I wanted to share a little anecdote with you. Today I haven't been in my office for a year, but I was in that building today. And when I came out, I was stopped by a stranger, a stranger who was like, I read what you wrote yesterday, it was brilliant, or something like that, And I wrote an ode to my city yesterday. It was widely read, and I haven't received this much love ever before during these 10 years. So there is hope. I just don't want people to think that it's all like sad and hard. And it's a reason why we stay. Because it is giving, and we're doing like the best job. It's a huge privilege.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you all for your questions and for listening in. Shazia Majid, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.